Assembly number 9283, Rules Report 61, Mrs. People-Stokes. An act to amend the agriculture and markets law and the cannabis law.
On a motion by Mrs. People-Stokes, the Senate bill is before the House. The Senate bill is advanced, and an explanation is requested. Ms. People-Stokes.
Of course, Mr. Speaker. This bill would create two temporary licenses that both of which will end June 2024. One is for cultivation and one is for processing of outdoor and greenhouse growing. The cannabis license applicant has to be someone who already is licensed in the state of New York to grow and cultivate cannabinoid hemp. In addition, the amount of cannabis grown under these licenses will be limited, but growers who apply for the license will be able to continue using it as long as they apply for a regular license in the future for a permanent license. Because outdoor and greenhouse growing kind of starts in March, this is New York, there is some urgency to approve this now. Being that OCM is expected to issue regulations for regular cannabis licenses to dispensaries sometime before the end of the year, it would make sense to have available products for them should they do that. The bill specifics: applicants would need to possess a valid industrial hemp growers issued license by the Department of Agriculture as of 12/31/2021 and have grown and harvested hemp for 2 out of the last 4 years. It would allow up to 20 artificial lights, with Office of Cannabis Management authorized to allow additional lights should they be necessary. It permits to a minimal process and to distribute cannabis products, and it allows cultivation license to be valid until January 30th, 2024. However, the processing and distribution of cannabis products will only be valid is only valid until June the 1st, 2023, at which time they will be required to apply for a separate regular processors and distributors license to continue the process of distribution. Conditional adult use processor license: applicant would need to have applied for a cannabinoid hemp processor license as of 12/31/2021. It also allows for processing and distribution of this cannabis product. It allows to produce and extract only permitted to do so under their existing hemp processor licenses, and the license is valid again, Mr. Speaker, until June 30th, 2024. Conditional licensees will have the opportunity to apply for a regular license once regulations have been finalized by the Office of Cannabis Management. The board will be required to report on such conditional cultivator and processor licenses by December the 1st of 2023, and again on January the 1st of 2024. All additional licensees will be required to enter and maintain a labor peace agreement within 6 months of obtaining their license. All conditional licensees would be required to participate in an environmental sustainability program and in a social equity mentorship program.
Mr. Tague.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Madam Majority Leader please yield for some questions?
Ms. People-Stokes, will you yield?
Yes, of course.
Sponsor, yield, sir.
Thank you. Could you please explain the labor peace agreement, which is also known as a project labor agreement that's in this plan? And if
Actually,
I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's not the same as a project labor agreement.
Well, we're going to agree to disagree on that one, madam, but
Okay.
I think it is. I'm somebody that's very familiar with project labor agreements. I worked with them for close to 25, 30 years. But anyways, I'd like to know if you could let us know exactly what the labor peace agreement is, and also if you could define what a bona fide labor organization is, please.
Well, first of all, let me just mention to you, Mr. Teague, that the labor peace agreement is something that was in the original Marijuana Tax and Regulation Act, so it is already in place.
But the language is
I would like
different.
to finish answering your question.
Yep, sure. Go ahead.
Anybody who gets access to a license in the state of New York, this is going to be a requirement because it's in the original piece of legislation. So this is not something new to this. This is just making clarity to the fact that it is still there.
The only thing that I would argue is that the language in the original bill is different than the language that is in this one. And if I remember our discussion during the marijuana legislation, you and I had a wonderful, very respectful discussion, and you kept using the word distressed farmers, and that this plan was going to benefit distressed farmers. I really don't understand how that statement can be made if we are going to include labor peace agreements, how we are going to help distressed farmers.
Well, the way labor peace agreements work, colleague, is that it simply says that should there be enough employees in whatever business we're talking about today, we're actually talking about the farming business, that desires to organize themselves in the interest of their jobs, that the employer won't object. That's all it says.
Okay,
It doesn't say that they have to organize. It doesn't say that they will organize. It just says that the employer agrees that he won't object to them if they desire to do that.
Okay, well, I read that differently than you, but could you also define for me what this bill means with regards to a bona fide labor organization? I don't know if I've ever heard that term before.
Well, I guess you could describe it as an existing labor organization or a new organization that got started around the desire to organize people who work in that area. It could be, an association that could be bona fide that works on farming issues and really knows how. It could be the State Farmers Association that organizes in the interest of people who work on farms. So I don't think it's necessarily a union.
It's not a union? Is that what you said? I'm sorry.
I don't think it necessarily has to be that. I think it could be an organization that works in the interest of the people who are employed.
So Farm Bureau, if they were to decide to have an undertaking of a bona fide labor organization, Farm Bureau would qualify to represent these employers and their employees?
I think the Farm Bureau could actually do that if they were representing the workers as opposed to.
I appreciate the answers with that. Madam Majority Leader, can you please tell me, and I'm sure you may not have the answer to this. If you do, it would be great. But I'm curious to know how many distressed farmers in our state hold a valid industrial hemp grower authorization that are in good standing with the Department of Agriculture. Yeah.
Well, I want to say that there's about I would say anywhere between 200 and 400 people that may be considered that. They are at least that many or more who are already licensed to grow hemp.
Now, would that number be consistent also for distressed farms that have harvested and grown hemp in the last 2 to 4 years?
Yes.
And could you also define exactly what environmental sustainability program, what it consists of, and also the definition um, of the social equity membership program. I would say if you want to start off with the environmental sustainability program, just wondering, you know, a brief definition of what that consists of.
Okay, so the Office of Cannabis Management is charged with coming up with the rules for how sustainability look. But if you understand the definition of the word, it means how are you going to sustain this as a business? How are you going to sustain it as a market? How are you going to sustain a product so there's always a good quality product that will meet whatever the needs are as it goes through the laboratory process. So it's sustainability of your business.
Okay, I appreciate that. And lastly, um, the social equity membership program, and I did read through the bill, it looks like it has different requirements. But do we have people already in place that are qualified to go on the farm sites and teach people this program? Or is this something, because I'll be honest with you, looking through this, a lot of the regulations and requirements aren't even in place yet. So I'm kind of wondering how someone would be able to get qualified to do this if we don't have anything in place with regards to this program.
So the definition of social equity is in the law, and honestly, the fact that distressed farmers is not in there was not in my definition, but it was in the definition of a lot of farmers in the state of New York who wanted to be included, and so they are.
Yeah, because I remember in our discussion back earlier, it kept being brought forth that this was going to be a great thing for distressed farmers. That word was used several times during the debate. So, you know, that's why I'm using the word, because that's what they were referred to as, distressed farmers. It was said several times that this plan was going to help distressed farmers. So, lastly, how do we expect, and I'm going to use the term again, distressed family farms, to be able to comply with these requirements, or to even begin to go into business when we don't even have permit regulations, or we have what I'm going to call bad legislation like this, which is going to put out bad precedent to promulgate these rules. I don't understand how we can put the cart before the horse. Why wouldn't we bring legislation like this, and so people can understand how they qualify after the regulations are in place?
So, as you know, when this law was passed in March 31st of last year, it would have been desirous if there had been a control board put in place prior to the new governor coming in place. But that didn't happen. And so the control board that is in place have been doing a lot of work and looking at how things work for other states as well as other countries when they legalize and open dispensaries. And one of the biggest problems that they had when they did that is that they would open the doors for 2 weeks, 2 months, and then they would have to close because they didn't have profit. And so this is an attempt for New York to get ahead of that problem by using New York farmers.
Well, Madam Majority Leader, I want to thank you, as always, for our little debate here. I'm going to speak on the bill, Mr. Speaker, but again, I want to say thank you, Madam Majority Leader. I always appreciate talking to you.
On the bill, sir.
I want to thank the sponsor, Majority Leader, for answering my questions. Mr. Speaker, while this bill is well-intentioned, it is not a good bill for distressed farmers. We were told time and time again last year while debating cannabis legislation that it was all about helping our distressed family farms, helping them diversify and give them opportunity in new areas of crop development. Just like the farm labor wage overtime issue, this bill does just the opposite. It actually hurts the people that it's intended to help. This bill requires a PLA, which will devastate distressed family farms. Folks call it a labor peace agreement, but if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, my friends, it's a duck. So a labor peace agreement is a project labor agreement. If you think for 1 minute there's a difference, you're awfully mistaken. My friends, the passage of this bill will set a bad precedent with long-term effects, the likes of which have never been seen before. It will destroy farms and agriculture in New York State forever. I have asked several times in other debates with regards to hemp and cannabis what this will do to benefit our farms. I was answered several times this was going to be a big win for distressed farmers. Well, folks, if you call this a big win, I would hate to see what you call a loss. I can't fathom how anyone could require that our family farms unionize to be able to grow and sell products in their home state of New York. This bill has special interests written all over it. What happened to my Democratic friends who prided themselves on standing up for the little folks, the hardworking blue-collar New Yorkers? Instead, you have chosen special interest and corporate farming over New York farm families. With all due respect, the folks pushing this bill don't know the first thing about farming or distressed farmers. You should be ashamed. In fact, the only thing these special interests have ever grown is a bloated state government. And the only thing they have ever milked are the taxpayers of the state of New York. Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to stand up for our farmers, stand up for common sense, and join me in voting no on this misguided legislation. Sir, no farms, no food. Stop fighting the hand that feeds us. Thank you.
Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Madam Majority Leader, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
Sponsor yields.
Good afternoon. Could you tell me why the medical growers in our state were not considered to be participants in this process?
Could you repeat your question, sir?
The current bill is only going to allow hemp growers to be part of the process. Why not the medical growers that we currently have in our state being part of that process? Because part of growing growing marijuana, you're looking usually for specific strains of plants that you're going to need, and in most cases, those are going to be cloned examples. And we already are growing medical marijuana in the state that could be cloned in conjunction with our hemp farmers who have the outdoor experience to grow that plant. I'm just wondering why the medical growers weren't allowed to be part of this process in the current bill.
The Office of Cannabis Management has the authority to define terms including but not limited to greenhouse, immature plant, and canopy as a part of the terms and conditions of adult use cultivator license. If that's your question, that's the answer.
So that would be for the official license, but these are for conditional licenses. Would they also be able to do that for the conditional license we're currently putting forward in this bill?
That is, I am reading from the conditional licensing legislation.
Okay. And then do you know how many hemp producers we currently have in the state?
That are in the hemp business. I don't have a number, but I want to say it's anywhere between.
There's about 526.
526?
That's a processor. It's about 200 to 400, depending on how if they had 2 years of grow or not.
So it's about 200 to 400 of them who actually have a license, but those who have been growing for 2 years, that number is probably less.
Okay.
But there are significant numbers of people who have a hemp license in the state of New York. As you know, we legalized the growth of hemp in New York just right before the federal government legalized it. And so it has been an industry that people have been using in our state for a while.
Correct. Correct.
The OCMS.
And do you have current numbers for how much hemp may have been destroyed?
Sir, can I just correct that number? I just got this from the OCM. It's actually 100 to 200 hemp farmers.
There are 100 to 200 producers?
Hemp farmers in the state of New York, yes, sir.
Okay, and then there would probably be fewer that have the 2 to 4 years of experience then, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And by the way, they are organized in something that calls the New York State Growers Association.
Okay. Would you know how much hemp may have been destroyed each year because it had a THC level that was too high?
We don't have that number, but we do know that almost every retail spot you go into in New York, whether it's a supermarket or a drugstore or a corner store or bodega, you will find something that has CBD in it.
Right. But right now we are going through and we have people that are regulating the industry just for hemp who have to go through and test the crops, and they are finding that some of this hemp that is grown already has THC levels that are beyond what is allowed for the hemp. And I think once we start doing that with the marijuana, we're going to have to expand yet even more people to go out and regulate to make sure that, again, the marijuana that's being produced is of the quality and the strain that they say they're producing. I would like to go on. This bill, how many conditional licenses will this allow for? So how many hemp producers will be shifting over to marijuana?
In the legislation that's before us today, there's only 2 potential licenses, cultivation and processing.
But how many people could participate in that? So of the 100, say that there's 100 to 200 hemp producers, let's say 50 of those actually have the 2 to 4 years of experience. How many of them do you think would this allow? Would it allow all of them to shift?
Anywhere from 1 to 200. It depends on what the Office of Cannabis Management, who they select.
Okay. And then does this bill give any other security considerations for the grow?
The existing law, all
The existing marijuana legislation provides for that, and because it also set up the Office of Cannabis Management, they will be the people who will administer that security.
Okay, so we're going to rely on the Office of Cannabis Management to take care of that. And then I've seen numerous calls for our poison centers that they've been going up since we passed the law that people are calling the poison centers concerned about their kids having ingestibles and severe reactions to those ingestibles. Are we doing anything to take care of that to make sure these ingestibles aren't getting into the hands of kids?
Yes, I know. I don't know how you, once you make a product legal, how you hold people, and you don't put your regulations in place right away, how you hold people down from not taking advantage of that. But I do know that the Office of Cannabis Management has recently sent out communication to several people who have already been gifting or however they do this trade for this product to let them know that it's illegal, you should stop doing it, and quite frankly, it would inhibit your potential to end up being a license holder if you continue to do so. So, and also know that a part of their requirement as an organization of management is to work with both the health department and the agriculture department to ensure that the right amounts of content is going into edibles, and that if they are edibles, they're not in packages that look like they're for children. And all of the things that protect people is what we're looking to do with this legislation.
Okay, yeah, I would definitely agree with doing more enforcement to protect our kids from getting their hands on these ingestibles. Again, anytime that you outlaw something, it always becomes more attractive. And you put regulations on it, becomes more attractive, but we need to give that message out there that, again, this is not appropriate for kids under 24 because it can affect the brain development. And 24 may not be that cutoff age. It may be older. So again, we need to do more about promoting that. Again, kids should not be ingesting articles that have THC in them. And we need to do more on that. But you go right to the gifting, which is what I was going to talk about next. It's a big issue in my community. We have one seller who has 7 locations across not only my district, but neighboring districts, 3 within my location. The sheriff and the DAs in Tioga County recently went ahead and raided 3 of those locations. And they had police cars out on the street. They had police officers inside the building. And while they were there, they still had people coming in with cash in hand to buy stickers in hopes of receiving marijuana as they left the shop. That's pretty brazen, I think, to go ahead as an individual. So we haven't made that apparent to people that gifting is illegal. I realize that OCM has delivered this message, but we need to do something more. So does this bill address gifting and make more stringent penalties for those who are doing that?
Could you repeat your question? Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to ask folks who want me to respond to their questions to make them concise. If you make a statement, a long statement, then ask a question, then we almost kind of lost your question. So could you repeat the question, please?
I definitely will. Does this bill that we're currently considering make more stringent laws for gifting to make it illegal?
What this bill deals with is providing for conditional licensing of people who already have a license to deal hemp, to grow hemp in the state of New York, and it will allow them to both cultivate and process adult use cannabis.
Okay. Thank you, Majority Leader Peoples-Stokes. And I will go on the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the bill, Mr. Friend.
I believe that before we take up any more bills to allow more marijuana to be grown in the state, to give people idea that marijuana is a drug that is just as benign as alcohol or tobacco smoke, which in my opinion, neither are benign. They both have serious health implications. For us before that, we're considering making this even more acceptable use within our communities. We should be taking care of the issues that we already see. I realize that OCM has issued cease and desist orders to the people within the state who are operating gifting locations. It's not working. They're not ceasing and desisting. They're not closing down their shops. One location will make, in my community, $6,000 to $7,000 a day. I have that one business that has 7 locations across my community and neighboring assembly districts. You add that up, $100 fine, $1,000 fine per day is not going to shut them down. And the fact that we're considering more legislation before we address that issue, I think is the wrong approach. We should not be doing that. Gifting is something that I've been asked about from my DAs, my sheriffs, since this summer. My local town supervisors have been asking about it. And this bill does not address that issue. When they initially called OCM this summer, those town supervisors, the DAs, the sheriffs called OCM this summer, they said that they were working on it and that it was illegal. But yet, what's illegal about it? I mean, yeah, they can go in, they raid it, they take out some of the products. In this one case, across 3 locations, they found 50 pounds of marijuana. As they were leaving, they took another 9 pounds off of a carrier bringing in marijuana to the location. They took $24,000 in cash. They saw a check made out to an attorney in New Jersey for over $54,000. This is a cash operation. And yet this piece of legislation that we're addressing today is not making this less acceptable within New York. It's brought forward to say that we need to have a source ready to sell when we make this legal. I say there is no issue with source. We already have source for an illegal substance miraculously appearing under our doorstep in New York at this moment. We need to be addressing that illegal substance and how is it getting here now before it makes our communities even worse. And unfortunately, this bill is not doing that. For those reasons, I cannot support making this a more acceptable use policy for a product that is not benign and we should not be telling our kids that this is an acceptable way to behave or to be tolerated in our state. I urge a no vote on this bill before we address more serious issues on this drug. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield for a few questions?
Ms. Peoples-Stokes, will you yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, of course. I
Ms.
will.
Peoples-Stokes yields, sir.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. For industrial hemp farmers who will be applying or have applied for this conditional cultivator license, is there any mechanism in the legislation that would clarify where they're receiving their starting material from for moving to cannabis from hemp?
So you're asking if there is anything in this legislation that says where they will receive their product from?
Their starting material.
I don't believe so, but I think it's up to the Office of Cannabis Management to make that determination.
Okay.
By the way, I have some suggestions for them if they ask.
I'm sure. Sort of in that same vein, or strain, if you will, no pun intended, well, pun intended. Is there any mechanism in the legislation to ensure that by issuing these temporary licenses that we're not grandfathering in bad operators who may already have illegal grow operations under their hemp license?
Yes.
Yes.
Has to review the final, permanent application.
Yes, there is. And because this is a conditional 2-year license, it will be evaluated constantly during the course of that 2 years. And when there is an opportunity to apply for a permanent license, if you have had violations, it will not be available to you.
So in that respect, has the Cannabis Control Board or Office of Cannabis Management established any regulations for the inspection process to ensure that once they receive these conditional licenses, that there are inspectors in place to ensure that there wasn't illegal operations taking place prior to the issuance of the temporary license?
Yes.
They have, okay. Has the Cannabis Control Board finalized any regulations in relation to the actual cultivation operations? Will they be under code enforcement for agricultural production, commercial production? Will that fall under state inspection or local, county, or municipality?
That's going to fall under the inspections of the Office of Cannabis Management. And not only are they working on the regulations, but they're feverishly hiring staff.
Okay.
So if you look online, you will see a place where, should you know people in your community that have an interest in doing this kind of work, they should apply.
Okay. And I think certainly I wouldn't be surprised if I get the same answer for these next couple questions. But with both hemp and marijuana or cannabis being a human consumable product, is there any mechanism for third-party testing, especially if we're using commercial, agricultural, to ensure that there's not microbes or pesticides that are making their way into the farmed product?
Yes, that was included in the original MARTA bill.
Okay. In the original legislation, there's a clause, and correct me if I'm incorrect in saying this, that OCM and CCB may have instill regulations for seed to sale tracking. Is there any development that you're aware of that has now made this a mandatory provision of the regulations that are in place to ensure that we're keeping legally grown product off the black market?
Well, my understanding from the board members and my understanding of the business is that you absolutely must have a seed to sale tracking system in order to be able to maintain the legality of the business as well as the quality of the product.
Is there any update that you would be able to provide on the status of if they've selected a vendor for that seed to sale tracking and not necessarily starting it from scratch?
No, I can't, but I can tell you I have talked to a number of people who would like to provide that service, but I can't tell you who they're selecting or who they're even thinking of selecting.
Okay. You mentioned, I believe it was in your explanation or one of my colleagues when talking about these conditional licenses are going to be issued before a lot of the other third-party processors. What are the cultivators going to do with the product, especially if it's an indoor grow operation that provides a quicker life cycle? What are they going to do with that product while they have it on site before the other licenses are issued to process and then make its way to commercial point of sale?
So your question is, how is the Office of Cannabis Management going to monitor the grow process,
No, ma'am.
the processing
So,
process?
so I'm a hemp farmer. I've now got a conditional license to grow cannabis.
Yes.
I have an indoor grow facility that's abiding by the number of plants and lights.
Yes.
I farmed, I've harvested, I have marijuana, but I don't have the next line in the commercial cycle. What am I doing with that product if there's nobody in my community that is licensed yet to process and or sell?
Well, the purpose for setting up these conditional licenses is that the Office of Cannabis Management fully intends to have, by the end of the year, I won't say the number of businesses because I'm not sure of that, but they anticipate opening dispensaries by the end of the year. And they want these farmers to prepare that product for them to put into those stores, both as a flower and as other products that are sold in dispensaries.
So is the effective date of this legislation effective once the governor signs it into law?
Yes, so that they can begin growing in this growing season.
So I guess my question means that because you have, we're in the middle of winter, an indoor grow cycle is quicker than an outdoor grow, obviously in New York. So one of the concerns I have is if we have product sitting on a farm, and I think my earlier colleague brought the idea up of security. Is there anything that we're doing to ensure the security of the product and the workers on that farm to ensure that we don't have product just sitting there while we wait for the next state in the next place in the supply chain?
Good question, and I think my understanding from communicating with the board Office of Cannabis Management is that when they select a person to get the license, they work through a time frame on when they need to have stuff available. We don't want you to go into a greenhouse and have everything ready by September because we're not going to have any stores open by then.
Right.
So there will be a time frame that they will work within these, both the farmers as well as the Office of Cannabis Management, so that the two things meet.
Yeah.
When the dispensary is open, the product is ready.
Okay.
The product is not ready before the dispensary is open.
Okay.
And they're the ones who have the capacity to work through both of those items, and I'm confident that they will.
Okay. If I remember correctly, back to last year in the debate on the original legislation, I believe some of my colleagues brought up, because of the federal nature of how it's treated, of marijuana being treated, one of the tougher needles to thread was the question of the revenue, the dollars that are coming in, and New York State receiving the tax dollars from this enterprise. Has there been any movement on how that will work, especially if we have farmers and processors getting conditional licenses and now potentially having to pay tax to New York State in advance of the full industry being 100% ready to go?
In April, the tax provisions take effect in April.
The tax issues are going to be effective April 1st.
April 1st of this year.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
As it relates to this business.
And is that through Office of Cannabis Management or the Cannabis Control Board through regulations they're determining?
The New York State Tax Office, as well as the Office of Cannabis.
Through Tax and Finance?
Yes.
Okay. Madam Majority, I thank you for answering my questions, and thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Mr. Lawler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Ms. Peoples-Stokes, will you yield?
Yes.
Ms. Peoples-Stokes will yield, sir.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader.
Sir.
I just want to start by clarifying from a previous debate with one of my colleagues. I believe I heard you say that an entity that gets a conditional license may uh, enter into an agreement with a labor union, but it was not necessarily required. And I just want to read Section 8 of the bill language and just get more clarification on that. So Section 8 says, the office shall set out specific terms and conditions setting out requirements necessary to be awarded and maintain a conditional adult use cultivator license, including but not limited to the requirement that a licensee agrees to participate in an environmental sustainability program and a social equity mentorship program. Such mentorship programs shall be directed to train individuals interested in becoming licensed cultivators and shall leverage remote and in-person mentees with experience in agricultural business management, sustainable cannabis cultivation, and best practices. Candidates for the mentorship program must be at least 18 years of age, must be a New York State resident, and must be individuals that would be considered social equity applicants as defined by Section 87 of this article. The license terms and conditions set out by the office shall include requirements that a licensee enter into a labor peace agreement with a bona fide labor organization that is actively engaged in representing or attempting to represent the applicant's employees within 6 months of licensure, that the maintenance of such labor peace agreement shall be ongoing material condition of licensure, and that licensees shall meet any other eligibility requirements established by the office. So I just wanted to get clarity. Are they required, based on that reading, to enter into a labor peace agreement with a bona fide organization, or is it something where they may do that?
If they are selected as a licensee to cultivate or process on this conditional basis or on any basis under original MARA law, they should understand that there's a labor peace agreement in place. That means you can't wait till you get 100 employees and decide you don't want to be organized. You don't want them organized. You've already accepted the fact that that could happen. Not that it will, but that it could. And if it does, you won't oppose it. Basically what a labor peace agreement is.
Okay, so a labor peace agreement, under your definition or under the bill's definition, is simply stating that if the employees choose to organize, they will not oppose it under the conditional license, correct?
That's it.
Okay. Thank you for that clarity.
You're welcome.
Currently today, is any entity in the state of New York growing and or selling recreational marijuana?
Ask that question again.
I'm sorry. Currently today, as of this moment, is any organization or entity growing and or selling recreational marijuana?
Well, according to an article that I recently saw in the newspaper, there are some people that are gifting marijuana, and whether or not they're purchasing that from somebody that grew it in New York State, I don't know that because I didn't realize people were violating the law like that.
And maybe I'll make it a finer point. Has the Office of Cannabis Management authorized any organization or entity at this moment the ability to grow or sell recreational marijuana in the state of New York?
The Office of Cannabis Management has not authorized anyone in the state of New York to grow adult use cannabis.
Okay, thank you. I heard the response to my colleague, but just to reiterate, this bill would take effect immediately upon the governor's signature and allow the Office of Cannabis Management to move forward with issuing conditional licenses, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. So immediately upon getting that conditional license, legally speaking, they could start growing once they got that conditional license.
Yes, as long as they're working in conjunction with the Office of Cannabis Management and its investigators.
Okay. At this moment, has the Office of Cannabis Management published or approved or authorized any regulations with respect to growing adult use cannabis?
They have not.
They have?
They have. If they have, it's not public.
It's not public at this moment. Okay. Last year, when you and I debated the original bill, I specifically focused in on the issue of potency. And I was focused on whether or not the Cannabis Board, Office of Cannabis Management, and the Cannabis Control Board would put a cap on potency. And your response, and I'm going to read from the transcript, I would defer to the Cannabis Control Board. I think they will be the right people in the right space. And why I say 18 months to 2 years is because that's actually how long it took every other state and or country. In fact, it took longer than 2 years for Canada to come up with a regulatory process. And so I believe it's going to take New York that much time at a minimum. Do you still believe it's going to take 18 months to 2 years at a minimum to come up with the regulations?
Some of them, but not all.
Okay. What is the urgency if there are no published regulations at this point? If the Cannabis Control Board and the Office of Cannabis Management have not finalized their regulations, what is the real urgency in trying to rush the grow at this moment?
Well, there is a desire by the office to have dispensaries open by the end of the year. So sometimes I guess it's just like with any business, you set goals for yourself. And that's the goal that the board has set for itself, to be able to open dispensaries by the end of the year. And understanding that, you need to have a product that would be available to open a dispensary by the end of the year. And in their mind, it made sense to try and engage, New York farmers to create that product for them. Now, on the other hand, these are people who have monitored and watched everything that's happened in every other state and every other country as well. And so you learn lessons from that. And some of those lessons say it may take you longer than the 18 months, and some of those lessons may say it takes you less time to do that. And so they figure out a way to use less time, by the way, because they just got started this fall. Although there were a team of people who were left on the second floor who negotiated the marijuana legislation in its original state that were still working on moving forward the agenda because the legislation had been approved, although there was not a board in place until the new governor came up on board. And so I think it's commendable that they've moved things this fast. And I would not hold it against them that I project that it would take longer.
To your knowledge, I know there are not regulations that have been published. To your knowledge, has the Cannabis Control Board made any determination with respect to potency?
To my knowledge, I don't know. I cannot answer that.
Okay.
But it's a good question, and I will ask it next time I see one.
Thank you. My concern is that because, as of my understanding and public knowledge, they have not made a determination on potency. If the product is grown now, prior to a determination made on potency, what happens to that product if it is put into dispensaries against what a potential cap may be on potency?
So if the governor signs this bill, we passed the bill, then the governor signs the bill, I don't think that it's going to take 8 months to figure out what the potency should look like. It has to take less time than that because they're asking the hemp farmers to put a seed in the ground. in this growth season. So you need to know what the potency is before it happens, right?
So
So I think they come up with it right away.
I would agree with you, and
Well, I don't have any real farming skills, but I think that you need to know that before you start farming the product.
I would agree. And I would hope that before any seed is put into the ground, that there are published regulations as to the potency of marijuana. And
I would hope so as well, sir.
I would hope that we can get that from the Cannabis Control Board, should this bill take effect. Okay, Madam Speaker, Madam Majority Leader, thank you very much for your time and answering my questions. On the bill?
On the bill.
Thank you. My biggest concern last year when we debated the original bill was with respect to potency. And the reason that I raised that concern was because potency back in 1995 was about 3.96%. In 2018, it was 15.61%. In Colorado, some of the most popular strains had THC levels ranging from 17 to 28%. And in products such as edibles, THC potency was upwards of 95%. When I asked Madam Majority Leader about that last year, we were told that it would take 18 to 24 months to come up with those regulations, and that the Cannabis Control Board would be making a determination on that. We have not seen such determination. It's only been 10 months, roughly, since that bill took effect. So, as Madam Majority Leader pointed out, there's another 8 months or more to go to try and come up with these regulations. And I am concerned that we are unnecessarily rushing this grow to get product on the shelves before all of the regulations can be determined. And we haven't even touched on enforcement with respect to law enforcement, and once the product is actually out on the streets, and how we are going to address those concerns that were raised in a previous debate on this matter. I would also note there's a great irony in the fact that just a little while ago, we passed a bill that relates to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs, and adding a number of drugs to those lists, classifying them as illegal. And it is ironic, because when you talk to those who are in the trenches dealing with the opioid epidemic, dealing with the concerns of substance use disorders, nearly every one of them will tell you that marijuana is a gateway drug, and marijuana plays a significant role in how people get to a point where they have a substance use disorder, especially when you're talking about heroin, fentanyl, and opioids. And so, at a time when, on the one hand, we are saying this is a problem and we need to address this by strengthening the law with respect to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs, yet on the other hand, we're saying, how fast can we get this product into the hands of people in New York State? And it is deeply concerning. And I find it remarkable that we are trying to ensure that this product gets into the hands of New Yorkers before the regulations have even been set by the Cannabis Control Board and the Office of Cannabis Management. So I strongly encourage all of my colleagues that we need to slow down. We need to let the Office of Cannabis Management do its work, get the regulations set, and then authorize people to grow. And I think that is an important distinction that we all need to take into consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Walczyk.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I will.
Wonderful to
On the
converse.
bill.
Thank you. Wonderful to converse with you today. Appreciate your answers to many of my colleagues. To be eligible for and maintain a conditional license under this bill, you'll have to have a valid industrial hemp grower authorization form to be in good standing with the Department of Agriculture and Markets as of December 31st, 2021. What was the number of industrial hemp growers that would have that good standing and license in New York State?
100. It's between 100 and 200.
Okay, between 100 and 200. And then additionally under this bill, you have to grow and harvest hemp for at least 2 of the past 4 years pursuant to that license and show proof thereof, including how much hemp was produced. Well, if that requirement is added in, what is that number reduced to?
I'm sorry, sir, if you could repeat that. I was trying to get the specific number of the hemp businesses that are licensed and eligible to get a conditional license. Just so when the next time I'm asked, I can say it specifically instead of between 100 and 200. 200. How number?
Okay, so thank you. The follow-up question through you, Madam Speaker, would be how many of those 200 also have met the requirement of growing for the last 2 out of 4 years? So all 200. Then additionally, you have to have a 51% ownership interest under this bill. How many of those 200 growers have a 51% interest?
That I do not know.
They will all have to do.
But they will all have to have it in order to get access to the conditional license.
Perhaps also under specifications in this bill, you could help me understand the numbers. It says cultivation shall only be permitted within the same or adjacent county. How many growers straddle adjacent counties, have farms on their adjacent counties? I'm just curious about the numbers on that.
I am actually not sure about that number, but that is something that I could ask either the Office of Cannabis Management or the Agriculture Department.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I wonder if you would tell me why that provision was included.
Because we didn't want them moving their operations down to other parts of the state. They have to stay where they're growing that.
Well, the desire is to allow as many New York farmers to have access to being early growers as possible, and not to set something up that will allow one person to go across multiple lines in terms of counties and leaving other people out. So in other words, share the wealth.
I noticed there was another requirement here that cultivation can only occur outdoors or in a greenhouse, which has no more than 20 artificial lights. Is that correct? Is that in this bill?
Yes.
How do we arrive at the number of 20 lights in a greenhouse?
It was recommended by the growers.
Well, it's actually recommended by the Association of Growers, and based on their understanding of environmental negative impacts should you use too many, and the opportunity for it to grow well if you don't use enough.
And of the 200 industrial hemp growers currently that would fall under this bill, how many of them are using less than 20 lights in a greenhouse? How many are using more than 20 lights in a greenhouse?
I cannot answer that either, sir.
And then finally, I saw a provision here that a licensee may cultivate up to 43,560 square feet of flowering canopy outdoors. That seems very specific, and I was wondering if the sponsor could tell me why 43,560 square feet was chosen.
That is the number that they asked for, the Office of Cannabis Management, the amount of canopy that should be grown, and I think that they thinks that that will fit the needs of the number of dispensaries that they like to open.
20 acre.
And through you, Madam Speaker, I wondered, with all of these specifications and qualifications in place, before we move on to the future requirements, how many of those 200 industrial hemp growers will be disqualified from moving forward under this with all of these in place?
I'm not sure how I'm able to answer that question. One, because they haven't been selected yet. Two, because we don't know who's going to violate what. And three, because how can I tell that somebody's going to be excluded before they even got started?
I guess another way of asking through you, Madam Speaker, would be how many growers are going to be excluded? How many current industrial hemp growers are going to be excluded based on their current business?
Sir, can I ask you why you think somebody's going to be excluded?
Well, I mean, I will yield to that question. Someone may perceivably have 21 lights in their greenhouse, which would exclude them.
Then they shouldn't apply.
I'm sorry?
Then maybe they shouldn't apply if they're not eligible for what is laid out in the legislation. And this is a conversation that will go on between them and the Office of Cannabis Management. If you meet the requirements of the law, then you can apply.
I would agree, Madam Speaker. I'll go on the bill. Thank you for
the bill
for the answers. I would agree. They probably wouldn't apply if they don't meet a lot of these qualifications. So we voted on the Taxation and Regulation Act for this emerging business, and it's becoming to look a little bit more like some crony capitalism that we've seen in the past in New York State, paired with some special interests and wired for some very specific individuals. We've seen what happens when in the legislature or driven by the executive or whether it's a management board, language comes in that, is really drilled down to be very specific for some individuals or some individuals who are looking for a competitive edge in an industry, especially a new one. So a new industry, here's how we welcome you to New York. You are welcome to New York. If you have a 51% interest in your new company, have grown for 2 out of the last 4 years, have already licensed in a retroactive date back to last year. You straddle 2 counties, you have less than 20 lights in your greenhouse, and your farm is very specifically 43,560 square feet. Plus, there's a bunch of new rules that nobody in agriculture has had to follow at any point in New York's history that you will then have to follow. And Madam Speaker, I would laugh at the strangulation that this body is bringing this new industry if it didn't set such a dangerous precedent for New York State farmers. So for the farmers past, for the farmers present, and for the farmers' future in New York State, I will be voting no, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, of course I will.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. I appreciate your yielding. Would you agree that PLAs raise the cost to do business?
Project labor agreements?
Yes.
Yes, but this legislation that we speak of today does not have a PLA agreement attached to it.
We disagree on that, but that's okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Would you agree that every acre taken out of food production will ultimately result in higher food and feed prices?
Would I agree that, say the question again?
Every acre taken out of food production will ultimately result in less food being available.
I guess I could agree with that analogy, but I could also agree with the point that some people are not producing farmery, food, or anything else on their farms and would like an opportunity to be engaged in a business that allows them to help send their kids to college.
I couldn't agree more. I agree with farmers having the opportunity and choice to grow what they want. It was just simply a question with respect to loss of land allocated to food when coupled with the CLCPA initiatives to put massive solar farms and solar arrays all over our farmland. So there's less and less land available for food production.
Okay, well, yeah, I do know that New York's one of our largest industries is agriculture. I hope that that doesn't change, because if there's no farm producing food, there is no food. So I don't think that this legislation is intended to diminish that. And I don't think that the CLC legislation is intended to diminish land that's necessary for farming.
I don't think it's intended to either, but it will. Every acre taken out of food production, regardless of what the reason is, development or allocation to other things, will result in less land available for food and feed production. Thank you for answering my questions, though. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, sir.
Madam Speaker, on the bill?
On the bill.
Thank you. This disastrous legislation is like so many others recently voted into existence to great detriment of our state, its people, our businesses, and it's a disingenuous attempt to hijack agriculture at the individual farm level, and will act as an additional forcing function to shutter our farms. Let's not forget, farms are price takers, not price makers. Add in the Farm Labor Wage Board ruling, if implemented, and the minimum wage increases, just by themselves will raise costs on New York State farms 42%. I hope this is recognized as bad, and then when coupled with additional labor challenges, more harm will ensue. So I'll end that piece with a question. What happens when you jeopardize our food base? I urge you to take this seriously, as every acre taken out of food production does inevitably make it harder to sustain our food base. I wouldn't want to be responsible for doing something so short-sightedly detrimental to our existence. And I think we can agree, we all eat 3 times per day. But how many connect the dots with where that food comes from and who produces it? I vote no and urge all colleagues to do so because of the PLA attachment to this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield for some questions on the bill?
Ms. Peoples-Stokes, will you yield?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I will yield.
Thank you, Madam Majority. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, sir. Thank you for asking.
May I ask what prompted this legislation?
The Office of Cannabis Management.
Okay. And what about the Office of Cannabis Management? Did they come to you and ask you if you could add this legislation to?
Yes, via Senator Henchy.
And I'm just curious about some of the sections of the law. One of them in particular, Section 3A, which talks about the quantity of artificial lights, sets limits on the amount of square footage that can be used for both canopies and in-house growing. Where did these designations come from?
Yeah. Sir, I can tell you that in the original composition of this legislation, there was no mention of light.
But specifically, there's.
But now it's there because the Office of Cannabis Management, as well as the New York Hemp Growers Association, said that it was something that was needed. And as they are going to be the ones growing the product, it makes sense to listen to them.
So, was the parameters that were placed on it designed to keep cultivation to a minimum for hemp growing?
Yes, the office wants to cap how much they can grow because we're giving them an advantage to start growing before everybody else.
Yes, it provides an advantage in the growth process.
Okay. Then certainly you're aware that in states that legalize marijuana cultivation and smoking, that there is a lot of illegal production that happens, correct?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of illegal production that probably happens in New York State. Else otherwise, how do we get these articles that were in the paper today?
And is
yes,
any portion of this bill, does it talk about, or the prior bill, the MRTA that we passed and we discussed last year, does any of the tax revenue generated go towards the enforcement of legal cultivation in the state?
yes.
Okay. Do we know how
From
much?
the original legislation.
Do we know how much, percentage-wise or otherwise?
I don't know what the number is, but I will say it's 20% of whatever the revenues that are collected.
And is there anything specific in this year's budget that talks about enforcement, money for enforcement of illegal cultivation of marijuana?
I'm not sure I didn't purview the part of the budget that deals with security, homeland security, or police departments.
Okay. Well, certainly you know that since you're very well versed, we talked about this bill ad nauseum last year. In terms of the illegal production, you're aware of the the drastic environmental impacts that marijuana production has on the environment, correct?
Aware of the impact that marijuana has on what?
On the environment.
On the environment?
Yes.
Actually, I'm not aware of that, sir.
Okay. So, if I may,
sure.
I would like to just read a portion of an article that was in a California newspaper last year, just to point out to my colleagues that may not be aware.
Madam Speaker, if I could ask the colleague who asked me to yield if he wants to go on the bill, or would he still like me to yield?
Madam Speaker, I would like her to yield, please.
Should I say?
Okay, well, I'm willing to yield if I have an opportunity to respond to a question.
I will ask a question. It says, 4 years after weed became legal in California for adult recreational use, state law enforcement officials have doubled the amount of illicit marijuana plants seized and eradicated in an annual campaign. California Attorney General on Monday announced that the Campaign Against Marijuana Planting Program, also known as CAMP, has eradicated nearly 1.2 million illegally cultivated cannabis plants this year alone. That's 2021. That's up from 600,000 plants seized in 2018, the first year that marijuana was legal in California, and that the CAMP program has increased in terms of the amount of spending that the state has to do with respect to policing illicit marijuana cultivation. So I ask you, Madam Majority Leader, with respect, don't you think we're putting the cart before the horse when we're pushing, and I agree with my colleagues, we're rushing to get weed on the counters for people to smoke in the state, but are we really looking at the impacts overall of legalization of marijuana in New York?
Sir, I do not agree with your position today. I did not agree with your position March 31st of last year either.
So how are we going to police the illegal cultivation of marijuana under this law that's before us right now that limits cultivation to 20 artificial plants and 43,000 some odd square feet of flowering canopy and additional square footage, 20,000 for other growing? Who is going to police it? The DEC, the Cannabis Control Board, the state police? How are we going to do that?
The Office of Cannabis Management.
They have police powers under New York state law. Do they have police powers under New York state law?
Yes, sir. In fact, they're at this moment hiring investigators. You can go on their website if you're interested and know someone who's interested in applying.
And I know we don't have rules and regulations set forth by the Office of Cannabis Management yet, but have you heard whether or not they're even in draft form at this point? Because I know that the appointments were just made a short while ago.
Expect to have regs out in April to make that
I fully expect the regs will be out momentarily. I'm sure it's not as fast as we would all like to see them. By the way, the board wasn't in place as fast as I would have liked to seen it. But I think that they are making progress, and I think this legislation before us today is the right way to go, and I think we should move forward with it.
And just as an aside, how does this law dovetail with the federal law which contradicts New York State law with respect to marijuana?
What was your question again, sir?
How does the law we're discussing today dovetail with federal law with respect?
Actually, it doesn't, because as you know, at the federal level, marijuana is still adult use is still considered a Schedule I drug. Hemp is not. Adult use is, but there are people in our state, farmers, who have been growing hemp for the last 2 years. Some of them have had license for at least the last 4 years, and as a result of their experience and expertise and the ability to grow this level of the plant, they're going to be offered an opportunity for a conditional license to grow adult use.
So does this law in any way, my colleague before asked about potency levels, so we don't need to cover that, but how about underage vaping and smoking of marijuana? Does this law address the increase that's going to be felt
It's still illegal for underage use of this product. You must be 21 years of age and older.
And does any portion of this bill deal with an increase in minors smoking pot that was seen in Colorado and California when marijuana was legal?
Well, your research shows you that the young youth adult increased under states that legalized. My research says just the opposite.
Well, Madam Majority Leader, with all due respect, we are not the first state in the union to legalize marijuana, correct?
You can answer that yourself.
So why don't we look to other states for comparative analysis and learn the lessons that they've learned so far? There was a whole group of state legislatures in Colorado that went as far as voted for legalization of marijuana, only to later on reverse course and realize that we had to regulate legalized marijuana because of the effect it was having on our young people and our motorists. Why aren't we doing that as part of this legislation or the MRTA?
By the way, sir, maybe I didn't hear some of the things you said early, but you really don't have to yell. I will say that the Office of Cannabis Management, as well as many people in the state of New York who have researched this product for a long time, have seen what has happened in some other states. And the numbers of young people increasing their usage that you keep insisting happen, we're not seeing the same data. The number of traffic accidents that you are concerned that's going to happen, no one else sees all of this data that says that. And so on one hand, there are people who agree, and on the other hand, there are people who disagree.
No, this
and at the end of the day,
with all due respect,
this is the same argument we had last year when the marijuana law was passed.
Madam
Now
Majority,
we're asking to implement the law that was passed, and we're having a repeated argument again. But I'm still willing to answer any question that you may have. I don't want to be lectured, but I will answer a question if you have one.
and I don't mean to lecture, I'm simply pointing out the facts that we know statistically from other states what has been the effect of legalization. You look no further than the Rocky Mountain study that was done in Colorado last year. You look no further than the NTSB statistics on fatal accidents caused by marijuana usage. So are you telling the members of this House today that the other states that have legalized have not seen a spike in minors using or in motor vehicle accidents or fatalities due to marijuana use?
Not in the research that I've seen, sir.
What about any potential increase in children that develop marijuana use disorder with the legalization of marijuana? Is there any, I asked at the budget hearing the other day for mental hygiene, whether there was any money put aside in the budget for any increases in minors using marijuana and developing marijuana use disorder.
I have not seen that research item, sir. Okay. I've seen just the opposite.
So out of the $350 million that is potentially going to come from tax revenue developed by the sales of marijuana, is there any portion that's there to protect young people who are suffering from mental illness as a result of marijuana use disorder?
Yes, there is.
And what percentage is that?
20%. Actually, 40%, I think.
So, just with respect to paragraph 8, which some of my colleagues pointed out, the language was read, and I read the language a little differently and interpret a little differently, because the word shall include requirements for the licensure to enter into a labor peace agreement. And do I understand, with your interpretation, shall means they may or may not, as opposed to shall meaning must do so?
Ms. Peoples-Stokes, before you answer that question, Ms. Solange, why do you rise?
Is this topic germane to the bill at chief?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Because we're not debating the MRTA, we're debating this piece of legislation before the House.
I don't understand.
Is the questioning at hand germane to this bill at chief? Because it's not germane to the topic of the bill at chief.
Mr. Speaker, I'm asking a question of paragraph 8 of the piece of legislation that's before the House right this moment.
It appears that it is relevant to the bill before the House. I appreciate that. You've stopped your time. Why don't you repeat that question?
Sure.
And then give the majority leader time to answer it. I did notice watching you guys on the screen that there's a little bit too much cut back and forth. Let's extend the question, allow an answer, and again, extend the question. Thank you.
Section 69-A, subparagraph 8, includes language that says, shall include requirements that a licensee enter into a labor peace agreement. And your answer to my colleague was that shall means may or may not. Do I understand that correctly? As opposed to shall meaning must.
No, sir, that's not what I said. But I said if the person who applies for this license understands that there will be a labor peace agreement here, there will be a labor peace agreement. Now, that person should also understand that should they decide sometime in the future that the workers want to organize, they're not in a position where they can stop them because they've agreed that there's peace around labor issues. That's all of this the same.
Okay, the record is clear. On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Bill, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very concerned about this legislation put before the House and that we're about to vote on. I feel that, once again, we're rushing to put weed on the shelves without proper regulatory framework to protect our kids, our motorists, and the growers because of the increase that we're going to see. And we know that these increases are coming because we don't to look no further than the other states that have legalized marijuana in the United States of America. I don't understand how we could sit here and not do a comparative analysis and look back. I've done it myself by reading the studies, looking at the statistics, and seeing what the impacts have been in other states and talking to the experts. Yet here we are, we're debating a bill that's going to open and pave the way for conditional licenses for people to cultivate, which will, by April, 2 months from now. And yet, at the same time, we're not doing anything relative to protecting the people that I already described. And for those reasons, and many, many more, I urge my colleagues to vote no on this piece of legislation until we do things the right way in this state. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I could be heard on the bill.
You certainly may be heard on the bill, Ms. Burns. And Ms. Peoples-Stokes is gracious of you.
I was going to say, we'll save you on this one, ma'am.
No.
It'll be my pleasure, ma'am.
On the bill, sir.
On the bill.
This bill, which basically is expediting the temporary licensure to sell marijuana, you know, I look at it and it seems at this point like there's inappropriate regulations in place. I've listened to all of the arguments that were raised by everybody here this afternoon, and I think it boils down to exactly what we were told on the floor. The purpose of this bill is, the express purpose is to get a crop growing to open sales by the end of the year. The purpose is to collect tax money. The state just wants money. This bill prioritizes money over people. It ignores the environmental concerns that have been discussed. It ignores the public safety concerns that have been discussed. And just, or more importantly, it ignores and pushes away farmers who may have wanted to grow this crop in the future because it prioritizes current hemp growers and it creates a new burden of labor agreements being mandated and required. In my humble opinion, these priorities are wrong, and I'm voting no.
Thank you, Ms. Burns. Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question I had, the majority leader answered prior, so she won't have to yield. I'd like to go on the bill, please, Mr. Speaker. Looking at this, all I keep thinking about is we're always rushing to be first, as I often say in this chamber, and we fail to be the best. You know, the question that was asked, that was answered, had to do about the Office of Cannabis Management. If the rules were in place and where we are, if they're not, how long until they're in place? And prior conversation indicated that we don't know. Well, that's the problem here. We don't have the regulations in place that can stop the black market sales on the street, the public safety aspect, because this stuff is going to be grown. And if you don't think it's going to make it to the streets illegally, I have a bridge to sell you. 17% of New York City shooting victims are related to drugs. 20% of New York City homicides by shooting are related to drugs. These are the stats. This is the data. And that is people. Those victims of those incidents are our neighbors, or our friends, or our loved ones. All I ask is that we slow down and we get it right. Let's stop rushing to be the first, and let's truly be the best. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mankerlo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Madam Floor Leader yield for a couple questions, please?
Ms. People-Stokes, will you yield?
Of course I will, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. People-Stokes, yield, sir.
Good afternoon, Madam Floor Leader.
Hi.
Just a few questions. I want to follow up on a couple of them that was asked by my colleague earlier.
Okay.
First of all, would this be considered a pilot program, just doing it for 2 more years?
Would it consider what?
Would this be considered a pilot program? You know, we're just going to do this for 2 years?
It's conditional licensing.
So at the end of that 2 years, if I was to do it, I could extend that possibly?
I wouldn't consider it a pilot. We've already made it legal in the state of New York too that we were going to set up this process. It's just the start of it.
Okay, I was just wondering how we came up with 2 years. Do you know how that happened, by any chance?
How it came up? Well, last March the 31st, we passed legislation that would allow marijuana to be sold, taxed, and regulated in the state of New York. There was a control board put in place when Kathy Hochul was sworn in as governor back in the fall of this year, And that control board, along with the previous legal counsel that was working with the previous governor, began to work furiously on putting some things together to start the initiative, and this is what they came up with.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. Earlier, one of my colleagues had also asked, how many hemp growers there are right now, and I believe you said 1 to 200. You still, that's the correct number?
In that area.
So one of the questions that came to my mind when I heard that question asked was, I know in this chamber we talk about groups of minorities all the time, black and brown communities, young farmers, people with disadvantages, disadvantaged farmers. Of those 100 to 200 growers, how many of those are people of color or low-income farmers? Do we know any of that?
Well, I do know that there is an organization of black farmers in the state of New York that has about 200 people in it. Whether or not any of them are hemp farmers, I don't know that.
Do you know if any of them are already hemp growers by any chance?
Do I know if any?
Do you know if any of those members are already hemp growers?
I repeat it. I do know that there is an organization of black farmers in the state of New York, somewhere around 200 of them or so. Of that number, I have no idea how many of them actually grow hemp.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. The reason I was going in that direction was, this really is very defined to having done production, hemp production 2 years prior, 2 of the 4 years prior, I believe the bill says. And so how would we get these new farmers involved into this if they're not already hemp growers? How do we get those individuals involved into this?
Well, the folks who end up with the conditional license, the 2-year conditional license, they are going to be required to do mentorships. So they can maybe work with people who never farmed in their life that has an interest in one day being a cultivator. Or they can work with people who are farming today and have an interest in wanting to cultivate hemp and or adult use marijuana. Or they can maybe work with people, young people who have an interest in learning how to farm this product.
So maybe one thing I could do is reach out to the group of the organization you just talked about a little bit ago, the Black Farmer Organization, because I think it's important to give everybody a chance to do this, and I think we as New Yorkers would be better to do so. And I'm not just talking black and brown communities, I'm talking all communities, whether, no matter what color you are. It doesn't really matter to me. It's just we need to help young people, new farmers, move into this. So one of the other questions.
That way, sir. I appreciate your support.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad to support you in that. Not just you, all of us. Absolutely. And one of the blessings I have is I'm colorblind, so I don't see the colors everybody else sees. So that's a blessing. Another quick question. Earlier, one of my colleagues had asked about the 43,560 square foot. Do you know how big of an area that is?
Can you say that again?
I'm sorry. Earlier, my colleague had asked, how did you come up with the number 43,560 square foot? That's an acre.
It's an acre, sir. I mean, I don't know how they came up with the number for an acre, but they came up with an acre.
Who is they?
Excuse me? The
Who
Office
is they?
of Cannabis Management.
They came up with that?
The Office of Cannabis Management.
Okay, thank you. And I'm assuming also they came up with the 25,000 square foot indoor greenhouse as well?
Yes.
So one of my other concerns, and maybe you can help me with this as well, I did the numbers. I looked into a greenhouse. To build a greenhouse, a 25,000 square foot greenhouse, it's going to cost somebody about $625,000 of an investment. My concern is, how would a grower do that if they're not sure that they can do it for more than just 2 years?
I think greenhouses may be included because they already have them. They're hemp growers. They've been growing for a while.
Okay, well, I know several hemp growers in my area, and I actually talked with one of them this morning on the phone. And that one hemp grower grew hemp for 2 years and is now not growing it this year just because he could not make any money doing it. And he's a professional farmer. They work a lot of acres, and they tried this. My concern is, how are we going to get these individuals to do what we want them to do? If my farmer that I talked with this morning couldn't do it, and I consider him one of the best farmers I know, how are we going to get these other farmers to do this? Because 1 acre is not a lot of property. And when you're talking about investments like this, We need to let it be bigger. If we truly want to get this stuff to market quickly, then let's let our farmers do what they do best and grow. Let's not keep it down to 1 acre. And maybe that's a conversation I need to have with the group that came up with the 43,000.
Is that a question?
I'm sorry?
Was that a question?
Kind of, sort of, not really. How's that sound?
Okay, well.
It started as one, but it kind of went the other way. So I apologize that. I apologize for that. Sometimes my mind just goes and goes. I'm a farmer and I love growing.
Well, even though it wasn't a question, I will say business is a risk, and everybody who went into the hemp business is not already still in. And by the way, everybody who went into the restaurant business is not in either. So, I mean, you take a chance and go in, and some people are successful and others are not.
All right. I appreciate those answers. And again, just like my colleague had asked about the light bulbs and who came up with 20 of them, I was just wondering where those numbers came from, how they got to 20 light bulbs or 20 fixtures.
That was a recommendation from the Hemp Growers Association.
Okay. In my district, I have a 5-acre greenhouse that grows tomatoes all the time. And 20 lights aren't going to do it. It was just a clarification. So, Madam Speaker, I appreciate you bringing this.
Is this the farmer that's no longer in the hemp business?
I'm sorry?
Is this the farmer that's no longer in the hemp business?
Oh, no, he's a corn farmer like me.
Oh,
so,
okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, you know,
but
this is a conditional license for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And most people understand that New York is the largest underground market of marijuana, not just in the country, but in the world. And so if you're talking about a conditional 2-year license that could maybe set up 100 or so dispensaries, look at what the capacity has left that's an opportunity for the guy who's no longer in business and for those who may choose to be in business, including some of the farmers that you mentioned that you'd like to see engage. So I think this is not the end of opportunities for people. This is the beginning of opportunities for folks. And so I hope we will begin to see it as what it is. We're starting something that we passed last year around this time.
Okay. I appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions, Madam Floor Leader. Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill, sir.
Thank you, sir. I just want to, again, reiterate that my concern with this bill is if we're going to do this, much like my colleague said just a little while ago, if we're going to lead and we're going to do it right, let's do it right. And we have a lot of experts that we talk to all the time, but we have a lot of farmers that are experts as well. They know how to grow things, they know how to harvest, they know how to make money, and know how to make things work. Let's rely on them to do the legwork. Let's rely on them to come up with a process in ways of making it work. And let's keep us out of their business. So I'm going to plan on meeting with this group, Mr. Speaker, who set up all these guidelines. And again, I'm concerned about the cost and in the long-term cost for a short-term commitment of 2 years. So if we could change that and get that part out of it and just let our farmers be farmers, I could support this. But until we make that change, I can't. But again, thank you for the time, Mr. Speaker. Madam Floor Leader, thank you for your answers as well. And I will be voting no. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield for a few questions?
Ms. People-Stokes, will you yield?
Yes, of course.
Sponsor yield.
I will.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. So am I correct in saying that this bill allows hemp farmers who have made an investment in learning how to grow a hemp crop to give them access to an early market for adult use cannabis if they switch from growing the hemp varietal to the cannabis varietal?
Yes. Yes, it does.
So that would take the risk out of making that shift. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I would assume that that would be of great benefit to those farmers.
I would think it would be a benefit to them as well.
Yes. So I want to delve into this question of labor peace agreements. So the original MRTA legislation defined labor peace agreement. Is that correct?
Yes. The original murder bill had an agreement for a labor peace agreement in it. contained in the law.
Terrific. And so am I correct in reading this that it means an agreement between an entity and a labor organization that at a minimum protects the state's proprietary interest by prohibiting labor organizations and its members from engaging in picketing, work stoppage, boycotts, and any other economic interference with the entity, and by entity they mean the farm. Is that correct?
Right. That's right.
Great. And so I just want to distinguish that with project labor agreements, which are defined in labor law, is because they're different, yes?
Yes, they are different.
Okay, so project labor agreements, if you don't mind, are defined as a pre-hire collective bargaining agreement between a contractor and a bona fide building and construction trade labor organization, establishing the labor organization as the collective bargaining representative for all persons who will perform work on a public work project, and which provides that only contractors and subcontractors who sign this agreement with the labor organization can perform such work. Are these marijuana farms defined as as public work projects?
They are not.
And do we anticipate that building and construction trade workers are going to be staffing these farms?
I do not.
So would it be fair to say that project labor agreements are not what is intended in this current legislation when we refer to project labor or labor peace agreements?
They absolutely are not. Project labor agreements have no role here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, on the bill. So I had the great pleasure of meeting with several of my licensed hemp farmers in Saratoga and Washington counties over the last few weeks when word got out, long before I even knew this bill was under consideration, that they wanted to make sure I was watching it and that I knew how important this piece of legislation was to sustaining their businesses. The CBD market, which is what most of the licensed hemp providers producers are in, is frankly a waning market. It's gotten way too crowded. And fewer hemp growers can actually sustain their business by growing hemp. So for them, the ability to access an early market for adult use cannabis is the lifeline that they need. So I want to commend the sponsor on this legislation, to thank her on behalf of all of the licensed hemp growers who are interested in shifting their business to growing adult use cannabis and who value getting into the market early as a way to minimize the risk associated with their business. I will be voting yes on this bill, and I encourage all of my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Warner. Mr. Smother.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield for just a couple of brief questions?
Yes. People Stokes, will you yield?
Yes, I will, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Majority Leader.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your answering questions here. I just wanted to go back to 2 points. Currently, the hemp market is regulated by the Department of Ag and Markets.
Yes, sir.
And that's one commissioner.
Well, just a point of clarification, under the Marijuana Tax and Regulation Act, the Agriculture Department that deals with hemp is shifted over to the Office of Cannabis Management, as will the medical operation out of the Health Department will shift to the Office of Cannabis Management as well.
And thank you for anticipating the second half of my question. The medical marijuana industry in New York, currently regulated by the Department of Health, will also shift to the Office of Cannabis Management.
Yes, sir, that's right.
And that's the migratory scheme that we have of 2 departments with 2 very distinct missions. One is public health, and one is regulating the food or the agriculture industry in New York. They have different focuses and different efforts. We're going to merge them in the Office of Cannabis Management in this case, which right now is the Office of Cannabis Management. Is its board fully filled by all of the appointees?
All 5 board members have been appointed.
So they were recently appointed, but they are up and running as a board at this point.
They are up and running as a board. In fact, there is a website. I will grab that website for you and repeat it momentarily. But they have regular meetings which can be viewed. They're public meetings, and much like ours, they have to be transparent.
And I appreciate that. Their ability to do work right now. I just looked on their website, And they have 34 openings for state employees, and they have 24 openings with multiple listings under each of those. It doesn't look to me like they're fully staffed. Is that a fair generality?
They are not fully staffed. They are anticipated to have offices both in the city of New York as well as in the city of Buffalo. They haven't even identified locations for
And
them
there'll be a
yet.
statewide regulatory agency once they're up and running. And that's actually one of the concerns that I have is while we're caught right now in the transition period that we're in between the MRTA, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, and this act today, which is going to, I would characterize it as jump-starting the marijuana industry in New York. Is that a fair statement?
I guess you can call it that if you like, sir.
Okay. And the reason I say that is because the Office of Cannabis Management is not fully staffed at this point, and they have recently missed several of their gates for their regulatory requirements because of the passage of the bill and the COVID pandemic and whatnot. You know, I think they're a little bit behind the power curve. One question I wanted to follow up is we said that there's maybe a couple hundred hemp growers out there. Has that changed? I went to the Department of Ag and Markets. There's 66 licensees that I was able to find off of their website, 61 of which are CBD, which my colleague mentioned is a over subscribed industry at this point, 2 of which are for recreational growing and 3 of which are research purposes. One of my other colleagues had questioned, because of the various requirements under this act, how many of those would actually be eligible to apply for this conditional licensure?
All of them that fit the requirements that are listed in this piece of legislation will be qualified to apply.
Okay. And how many medical marijuana growers are there in the state of New York?
10.
10, right. So 10 of them, one of which happens to be in my district. So I'm actually...
They're not included in this because they don't grow hemp.
I'm sorry?
The registered organizations that grow medical marijuana will not be included in this legislation because they do not grow hemp.
And why not?
They don't grow hemp.
Well, so we're picking a winner and a loser. We're picking one area of industry to grow this recreational when another area would be just as qualified.
So it would be perfect if we could pick everybody all at the same time. As a matter of fact, there are a number of companies from California that would like to be chosen right now as well. But the Office of Cannabis Management has made a good recommendation to start with our existing licensed hemp farmers, and I agree with that, and I think we should move forward with this legislation.
Wouldn't, in the interim, wouldn't we want to pick maybe even an out-of-state vendor that has high standards that are certifiable as opposed to trying to, on the fly, create growers?
Sir, I hear your position, and it's not a position that I will necessarily agree with, except in this instance, we're focused on licensed hemp growers who are New Yorkers. You might know that most of the people who own the registered organizations in our state are not New Yorkers. They're mega firms from across the country and across the world. And so, thought it's smart to focus on New Yorkers first.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Majority Leader. Mr. Speaker, on the bill?
On the bill, Mr. Smullen.
My concern with this bill that came up very quickly is that we are rushing to failure in New York State to grow this industry. I think it's very important that we have very high standards for the actual ingredients that go into these drugs that we're going to be selling to our citizens. And because of that, I think that there are certain gates that we should make, including having the regulatory structure completely set up before we permit and license people that have been doing in another industry when we already have some people in another part of the industry in New York that grow very high standard products. And that concern goes to what I think are one of the big things that we ought to keep our eye on going forward, which is the medical effects of marijuana usage on our citizens, whether it's adults, whether it's young people or youth in their development, and how this is actually going to affect them going forward. I say we should be very cautious in how we set up this industry, to not do it on the fly, to not do it without due diligence and having our structure in place and having all of the regulatory framework set up. And for that reason, I'm certainly not going to vote in favor of this bill. and urge all of my fellow legislators who look at this from a cautionary viewpoint to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Smother. Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the majority leader yield?
Ms. People-Stokes, will you yield?
For Mr. Goodell, absolutely.
Mr. Goodell, the sponsor yields.
Thank you very much, Crystal. Of course, I could have just lead you across the aisle and asked you these questions, but
You could have.
it seemed that my colleagues were
No,
busy.
we can always talk.
Yeah, it seemed like my colleagues were busy, and so I gave you that break. A lot of talk today about the labor peace agreement.
Okay.
And am I correct to assume that if a grower, an existing industrial hemp grower, already is unionized, already has a collective bargaining agreement, that this provision, that collective bargaining agreement would meet the provisions in this law?
This is a labor peace agreement that was included in the original Marijuana Tax and Regulation Act. And it just suggests that whether you are unionized now or your employees decide to organize later, you can't do things to prevent that.
So would you envision that if you're already a unionized industrial hemp grower, that you would have to enter into a second agreement, a new agreement to meet this law, or would your existing collective bargaining agreement suffice?
I actually don't think you would have to have a new agreement. If you get selected to be a conditional adult use grower under this legislation, you have to adhere to this. So there's nothing new there, even if you already have organized labor on your site.
And the same corollary question, am I correct that if it was a union that attempted within the last 6 months to unionize, and the employees voted down that attempt, that the employer would still have to enter into a labor peace agreement, even with the union, even though all the employees within the last 6 months had voted it down?
Yes. So they can vote it down if they like, but the employer can't interfere.
Are you aware of any other examples in New York State where an employer must have a contract with a union after that union has been rejected by the employees?
That's not what this says.
Well, you have to have a labor agreement under this.
No, not a labor agreement.
Well, you have to have a labor peace agreement. Right? So, to be more precise, do you have any other examples in the state of New York where an employer must have a labor peace agreement with a union that has been rejected by the employees in order to do business in the state of New York? Do you have any other examples?
I don't have any other examples of that, sir. Okay. Do you have any?
No, I've never heard of it before. This is the first time I've ever seen something like that. We have other situations where by law we grant a monopoly. Utilities are a prime example. But when we grant a monopoly, we also have regulatory oversight, like the Public Service Commission. And that Public Service Commission makes sure that the terms and conditions and the rates and everything else of that statutory monopoly are fair and reasonable. Is there any provisions in this bill or elsewhere that would require the union, and there likely only be one, that is now granted a monopoly to decide whether the private company can be in business or not in this area? Is there any oversight to ensure that the negotiations are fair and reasonable?
The negotiations between the employees and the owner of the hemp firm?
No, the negotiations between the employer and a labor organization that had attempted to represent the employees in the past.
The employer doesn't have a responsibility to talk to a labor organization because this agreement doesn't require that he does so. This agreement just requires that he doesn't prohibit his employees from ever deciding to organize for the purposes of being in a collective.
But to be clear, the employer cannot get a license to go into this business unless he has a labor peace agreement with a union, and that means that particular union has a statutory monopoly. Is there any oversight by any third party or the state itself to make sure that those negotiations are fair and reasonable?
Well, I think, you know, however labor unions are provided oversight will come through the same method that they do now, through the Department of Labor as well as through the organization like the Office of Cannabis Management, in which they're organizing.
Now, we've mentioned a great deal about how the only ones that would be eligible for this conditional license are those who are already engaged in growing industrial hemp. And the statute that authorized industrial hemp growth, which we adopted back in 2019, required that the grower be a person of good character and expressly authorized a criminal background check. And it was clear from the original legislation as it related to industrial hemp that if you had a criminal background that would affect your good character, you would be ineligible for an industrial license. But I note in this draft, one of the requirements is that the industrial hemp grower, in order to get a license, had to have a social equity program that focused on individuals who were, quote, social equity applicants, who are defined in earlier legislation as, among other things, having a priority if they've been previously convicted of a marijuana-related offense. So my question is,
but that's not totally the correct definition of social equity, by the way. There are a lot of people who could fit social equity that's never been convicted of one thing. Let's don't put them all in the same.
Well, looking at Section 87 of the original marijuana law, subparagraph 3 said the social equity plan shall require consideration of additional criteria, and extra priority shall be given to applications that demonstrate that the applicant is a member of a community disproportionately impacted, has a lower income, and C, was convicted of a marijuana-related offense. And so my question is, if the original marijuana legislation that we passed last year requires as a definition, or shouldn't say requires, gives special priority.
Thank you for saying shouldn't say.
Yeah, thank you. But gives special priority to individuals who have been previously convicted of a marijuana offense. Does that then create, how's it a hemp grower who is required to maintain good character and is subject to criminal investigations, how are they supposed to comply with a social equity program that gives a priority to people who have been arrested for violating the marijuana laws?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure why you're suggesting that they're required to give anything to a person that's been arrested for marijuana. And by the way, you know, I live in an impacted community. I've never been arrested. I could be a social equity person, okay? There are many people who live in communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs that have never been arrested. So to put those two things together as if they have to, one has to be both, is not correct. As a matter of fact, there are MWB businesses that are listed under social equity. A lot of these people have never been arrested for anything either. So I think it's a little disingenuous to assume that social equity means you must have been arrested.
I was just quoting the statute, that's all. But again, Majority Leader, thank you very much. And thank you for your patience and answering questions all morning and part of the afternoon.
It's my pleasure.
On the bill.
On the bill, Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, sir. We should be clear right up front that this legislation is not designed or intended in any way to help any of our traditional farmers. First, this bill is really clear that the only way you can get a conditional license is if you farm less than 43,500 some acres, which is 1 acre. Now, most real farmers, when I say real farmers, I should say most commercial farmers would tell you that a 1 acre plot is like a vegetable garden. In my district, that's a vegetable garden. It's not a farm. If you're cultivating 1 acre, you can use a handheld rototiller. You don't need a tractor or a tiller or anything else. And so anyone who has any conception that this is going to help out our family farms is sadly mistaken. It's limited to 1 acre. But even there, this bill has something that I have never seen anywhere else in the state of New York. This bill requires that as a condition of getting a license from the state of New York for a private company to go into business, they have to have an agreement with a union. Must have an agreement with a union. And it's not a collective bargaining union that represents their employees, because this language is very clear. You have to have an agreement with either the union that represents your employees or a union that was attempting to represent your employees. Which means that a union could have come and tried to unionize your employees. Your employees could turn down that unionization effort unanimously. And this bill says to the employer, you still must have an agreement with that union, or we will not let you go into private sector business in this area. Lawyers sometimes talk about contracts of adhesion. And that's a contract with a negotiating party is not on a fair and level playing field, where they must sign a contract. And this creates exactly that situation. Because if you're a private sector employer and you are not unionized, and your employees do not want to be unionized, you cannot go into this business and you cannot get a conditional license unless you negotiate an agreement with a union. Now imagine you're the grower, and I represent the union. And so when we sit down, my first question to you would be, do you want to be in business? And if you do, my next question is, let's talk money. Because unless you reach agreement with me, you're not in business. It's a monopoly. And the union, under this monopoly, holds every single card. Did I tell you I wanted 25% of your profit in order to give you that license? I was mistaken. I meant 50%. Did I say 50? Maybe it should be 75. There's no restriction whatsoever. They are the gatekeepers, and they, and only the union, including unions that have been rejected by the employees, who have the key. As noted by my colleagues, do we have any regulations about what kind of marijuana plants can be planted? What the potency is? Answer, no. Do we have any regulations on how the dispensaries are to be operated once this crop is harvested? Answer, no. Are we allowing new people, new potential farmers who want to convert their, apparently their vegetable garden into marijuana operations? Can new farmers enter this field? Answer, well, no. You have to have an industrial license for at least 2 out of the last 4 years. It's closed. Well, if you've been successfully growing marijuana, this particular type of plant, if you've been successfully growing it in New York State under tight regulations, under existing regulations, can you grow it here? Answer, no. If you've been growing medical marijuana and meet all those tight, stringent requirements, you're ineligible. This is a strange bill, and we should be absolutely clear. It crosses a lot of lines that we've never seen before in terms of creating a monopoly, requiring employers, perhaps over the objections of their employees, that enter into a contract with unions. We know that virtually no farms in the state are currently unionized. Nationally, it's only 2 or 3%, so we automatically, off the top, exclude anyone who's non-union, unless they want to enter into a negotiation with the union. And we're moving forward without any of the regulations in play for the rest of the process. For those reasons and others, I recommend against this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, thank you to the majority leader who's been very kind and helpful all day.
Thank you. Mr. Peoples-Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to actually applaud my colleagues for what I think in some cases were really good, thoughtful questions that bear some follow-up, and I kind of commit to having that follow-up. But in some cases, it's the same argument as we had a year ago, and because people just simply don't agree that adult use has a place in New York society. Well, the vast majority of us in the state of New York do believe that, and so I think this moves us forward with making that process real. I do also want to say that because we're offering a conditional license for people who are already growing hemp, does not mean that a person who's never grown anything can't get a license at some point in the state of New York. I think what it does mean is that not only can that person at some point get a license, but there'll be more room for them to have a piece of the market because we're limiting it to New Yorkers who grow hemp. I heard my colleagues say that, this should be open to anybody who's growing right now. This should be open to the existing registered organizations, 200, 300, $400 million companies. We open our market up to them. Nobody else ever gets in. And I think that it makes sense. I like the way the Office of Cannabis Management is starting so that they can provide an opportunity for New Yorkers to get access to the market before it goes off the handle. I know that this is challenging for a lot of people. I know that there are some people who think that there will be no social equity or no people of color who have access to these conditional licenses. I don't agree with that. I don't know all the people, but I believe that there are people on that list who have been growing hemp who will have the same availability to these conditional licenses as everyone else. I am grateful to the New York Growers Association for their input in this legislation because, quite honestly, a lot of the things that are here would not have been here had they not weighed in their opinion. And I also want to, just speak to the whole labor peace issue. This would not have been my preference, but again, when you're in a business where it calls for compromise, you want to get things done. You've got to move forward with getting them done. A labor peace agreement does not require anybody to pay dues. Its employees are not members of a union. And there's nothing that enforces the employers or the employees to create a union. All it says is that you can't do things to prevent it. Now, we recently just saw Starbucks in my community unionize. And by the way, Starbucks did everything in their power to keep those people from doing that. Everything legally in their power. A labor peace agreement would not have allowed them to hold that up for 6 months and had these young people celebrating like they had really won a lottery just when they got the ability to get decent work hours and those sorts of things that add value to their life on the job. And so I appreciate the Farmers Bureau for writing a memo of support on this legislation because they do support it. but I also honor their opinion, just like I honor my colleagues' opinion about the labor peace agreement and how they think it could be detrimental. It will not be detrimental, one. And two, it's already legal and required in this industry in the state of New York as a result of the legislation that was passed March 31st of last year. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate my colleagues' patience for this conversation that we've had today. I can only tell you that this is another part of the beginning. It's not nearly the end. And I would encourage everyone who can see the vision for not just the Office of Cannabis Management, but the opportunities to build wealth in communities that don't have access to wealth, as well as the opportunity to bring healing and wellness to our community. I would encourage people to vote yes on this one. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Peoples-Stokes. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
The clerk will record the vote on Senate Print 8084A. This is a party vote. Any member who wishes to be recorded as an exception to the conference position is reminded to contact the majority or minority leader at the numbers previously provided. Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, sir. The Republican conference is generally opposed to this legislation, but those who would like to support are welcome to call the minority leader's office and we'll record your vote accordingly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Peoples-Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My majority colleagues would generally be in favor of this piece of legislation. However, there are a few who may not. And if that is so, they should contact the majority leader's office and we will be honored to properly record their vote.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples-Stokes. Mercifully, I think. She doesn't want to talk. Mr. Friend to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To explain my vote,
Proceed.
we only need to look to our own communities to see that both illegal use of marijuana and underage use of marijuana have increased in our state since we've allowed the MRTA to move forward. Unfortunately, individuals have taken advantage of the gifting law in the MRTA by opening sticker stores across our communities. Even though Office of Cannabis Management has come forward and said that these are illegal and they need a cease and desist. There aren't laws in the books to stop these operations from occurring. Locally in my own district, the DA and Sheriff's Office have gone into some of these stores only to temporarily shut them down for them to reopen immediately the next day with customers waiting in hand as the sheriffs and DAs were on the property. If you reach out to our poison control centers, you can find out that our kids who are underage have increased their use of ingestibles. I cannot support a law that will allow this to continue without first taking care of the people in our community and especially our kids. We need to look out for their future. We need to tell them that this is not okay, and we need to take care of that first before we start growing more potent forms of marijuana within our own districts. For those reasons, I vote no.
Thank you, sir. Although I'm not up on this, please, I'm not high on it. Please record my colleagues, Mr. Durso, Mr. DeStefano, Mr. Gandolfo, and Mr. Ra in the affirmative. Thank you, sir.
So noted. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 99, noes 43.
The bill is passed.